Hey YouTube, it's Andy. Today I'm just doing a short review on the Lenovo Yoga 730 13-inch. So this is a two-in-one laptop. You can flip it around. It has a pen so you can write right on the screen, which is something I'll talk about. I've been using this as my personal laptop for the last month, so I've been using it every day. So in that time, I've been able to learn a few things about it, notice a few things, and I thought I would share some of my thoughts, and hopefully this will help someone out there decide if this should be your next laptop or not. So let's get started by looking at the design and build quality. The Yoga 730 is a pretty striking computer for $800. To me, it bears quite a bit of resemblance to a MacBook Pro, which I think is fine. Every surface you touch except the keyboard is metal or glass, and there aren't really any distracting seams around that you're going to notice, so it's very nice to look at and hold. The only issue I did notice with the build quality is that right out of the box there was a little bit of creakiness when I was carrying it one-handed or when I was flipping it into yoga mode or putting it in tablet mode. Fortunately, I was able to correct this by tightening the screws on the bottom of the case a little bit. So those are Torx T4 screws, so a pretty small Torx driver. But now it sounds as solid as it feels, which is awesome. So I have the iron gray model. It occasionally will show fingerprints, especially if I've got like the sweaty hands for some reason and grab the whole thing and I'm carrying it somewhere. But for the most part, fingerprints just sort of disappear on it, which is awesome, especially compared to the X1 Carbon that I use at work, which is a fingerprint magnet. So let's go ahead and talk about performance. There isn't a ton to say here, as performance is totally meeting my expectations. To be fair, I haven't pushed this machine that hard yet in terms of video editing or gaming, but I have done some simple raw photo editing and Photoshop elements, and it handled that just fine. I also have played a little bit of Civilization 5 on this, so not even the newest version of Civilization, which I think it might have some frames per second, some FPS issues with. But I've been playing a little bit of Civ 5 on it with the touch screen, and I haven't had any issues with that yet, but I haven't really made it super late into a game where those turns can get pretty gnarly and pretty CPU intensive, so I'm curious if it will run into more trouble once I get into the late game in Civilization. The 128GB SSD that my model came with seemed pretty snappy while I was using it, but I've already upgraded that to a 512GB Samsung Evo to enjoy a little bit more file freedom on this guy. So you can check out my SSD swap video, which I have linked in the description, if you want to see how that went. The only aspect of performance that's been a little bit of a surprise was Wi-Fi performance right out of the box. Initially, Wi-Fi frequently lagged, starting right at a connection, or it would perform extremely slowly, just going from page to page. After getting things fully up to date using the Lenovo Vantage app, the situation has fortunately gotten much better. So there must have been a driver update in there that helped with this Realtek card that's in here. So Wi-Fi was really poor for me, or really spotty. It wasn't always bad, but it was very poor for me right out of the box. So update those drivers if you're having Wi-Fi issues, because it made a huge difference. While I was writing this review, I actually did a file transfer test from my file server on both my X1 Carbon and on the Lenovo Yoga 730. And the speed results were extremely similar. Both were getting right around 23 to 24 megabytes per second, so about 200 megabits per second, which I guess is fine. I haven't compared them to a bunch of other laptops. And I'm in a pretty, not the greatest Wi-Fi spot where I am. The 8 gigabytes of RAM is soldered on, so it's not possible to upgrade that. I've toyed with the idea of picking up an eGPU and making this my sole machine for literally everything, but the lack of an upgradable RAM makes that kind of a deal breaker. I think it could actually probably do fine for games right now with an eGPU, especially the games I play. I play mostly Rocket League, strategy games like Civilization, but also a bunch of RTSs, but a lot of them are old, so Age of Empires 4 is coming out, but I think this would probably handle that just fine. But that 8 gigabytes of RAM that can't be upgraded is kind of an issue moving forward. So because of that, I don't think I really want to commit to using this as my only machine. A few more years of Chrome updates will have me wishing I had sprung for the 16 gig model. That's without even trying to use this for gaming. So That 8 gigs of non-upgradable RAM, not a huge deal because, I'm not expecting this to be a beast for years to come, but it is going to limit you moving forward. All right, one thing I do want to talk about a little bit is the software configuration of this machine. And I guess this is just pretty common with a lot of consumer-grade Windows computers. But this computer came with McAfee antivirus installed, among a few other Lenovo bundled applications. And so I guess it's important to have some sort of antivirus installed, though I really prefer Windows Defender, which is built into Windows. But even, that aside, McAfee is the last one I would choose. It's notorious for being resource intensive, which will not only make your computer slower, it'll run your battery down more when it's like chewing through CPU cycles, just doing unnecessary stuff. And it loves to just like dig its hooks in all over the OS, just browser extensions and all sorts of junk. So I'm not a fan of McAfee at all. The very first thing I did when I got this computer was use the Windows 10 Media Creation tool to create a fresh flash drive and just do a totally clean installation of Windows on this. The one caveat to that would be that there are some apps that I had a little bit of trouble getting back on from the default installation that took a little bit of jiggering, but I'll talk a little bit more about that, and you guys can leave comments if you have similar issues. Because it actually does tie into this very next section, which is where I'm going to talk about multimedia, especially the screen and the speakers. So I find that the screen is very pleasing to look at, and it seems to be just bright enough to not be an issue. So I haven't yet, other than like obviously when you're outside, there's not much you can do about that. But like inside, I haven't run into a time yet when the screen wasn't bright enough, but it's just barely bright enough. And so you're going to find yourself using those, like you're going to be in the final 2 notches of brightness in Windows, like 95% of the time or more. Unless you're in a totally dark room, you're probably going to be on one of the 2 brightest notches. One thing that was kind of annoying on the screen, especially relating to brightness, is that Lenovo had enabled adaptive brightness by default on this machine. Obviously, my clean installation sort of took care of that, but that's where the screen brightness changes dynamically. It tries to guess the brightness of the lights in the room that you're in. And, without really good ambient light sensors, that type of functionality is just a total fail, and I'm pretty sure it's using, like, the webcam. So it's awful. It just makes things way darker and more annoying than they should be. The speakers on the Yoga 730 sound great for such a thin, light, and affordable machine. At least once you've adjusted the included Dolby Atmos app. The Atmos app on my 730 was pre-configured to music mode, which doesn't sound like a bad thing, especially when most of what you're listening to, or a lot of what you're listening to is music. But I really found it to sound soft, muddy, and overly focused on the low end. So opening that Dolby Atmos app, all I had to do was change that to the dynamic mode, and it made an unbelievable difference in terms of volume, clarity, and fullness. I can't believe that they'd ship it with such a sub-optimal setting, but at least this was a really easy fix. The Dolby Atmos app does allow you to go in and do a totally custom EQ if you wanted to. I haven't really messed with that yet, because once I moved it from music to dynamic, I think they sound pretty darn good for such a thin and light machine. So this app, though, is the one that I had trouble getting onto the Yoga after I installed my new SSD, because the drivers that Windows automatically grabbed from Windows Update did not include the app, and trying to manually install the driver package from the Lenovo website would look for the driver that you currently had, and it would say, hey, this is the correct driver. And so it would refuse to install the included app. So I had to go in and remove the audio device from 2 separate spots in Device Manager, and then I was able to manually install the one from the Lenovo website. If you have questions on that or need help, put a comment below. I can make a short video on that. That would be easy to do. But yeah, audio good as long as you've got that Dolby Atmos app set correctly. Moving on to input devices, I'm going to start with the keyboard. So this is undoubtedly a very low travel keyboard. I guess I've seen numbers that it's like right at 1 millimeter. So that's basically the same amount of key travel as the current gen MacBook Pros. But I find that it still gives me an overall pretty soft feeling that I find quintessential to the laptop typing experience. So it's definitely not as soft and luxurious as my X1 Carbon, and I have noticed that it's a little bit easier to make typos with just a finger slipping over and accidentally pushing a key down, just because there's not that much resistance there. But I don't find that happening enough to actually bother me. Moving on to the touchpad on the Yoga 730, it's quite frankly awesome. So the texture is super smooth, I think it's glass, and the tracking is perfect on it. And the click is like a really sharp, just a short, sharp click where it's not mushy at all, but it's not harsh. You don't have to push too hard. This is a really great trackpad. It's also as large as it really could be on this machine without starting to look kind of awkward and weird. So I have to say, hands down, this is the best Windows touchpad I've ever used. And, it's been a while since I've used a MacBook Pro regularly, but I think this is a MacBook tier touchpad. I don't think touchpads get a whole lot better than this. Alright, so the touchscreen and pen input on the Yoga 730 were definitely factors in my purchase. I've been wanting a pen-enabled tablet for a really long time. I thought about a Surface Pro or an iPad Pro even, but I could never really justify the cost of something like that I'd use pretty much just for doodling. That's, I'm not a serious artist. I do use Photoshop for like work stuff, but I haven't learned how to use the pen there. So I really just love doodling and sketching, and I hate burning through a bunch of paper. So that's what I wanted a device for. And the super light weight of the Yoga 730, just 2.5 pounds again, made it a really good option because I kind of needed a new personal laptop that was a little more modern than some of the older ThinkPads I have. I wanted something more modern, and having that thin design, the thin and light design, and being able to get the pen, which you can get for like $20 on Amazon, was just a no-brainer because it's a 2-in-1 device, and it actually works quite well for that. So about the pen, I'm no pen expert by any means, but the tracking seems very accurate. I'm able to write just as neatly as I would with a pen on a piece of paper, so that seems pretty cool to me. I did get the cheaper pen. Like I said, I paid about $20 on Amazon. It has 2048 levels of pressure sensitivity, and I think it feels pretty nice. I do find myself accidentally clicking the buttons at times, so I accidentally erase something when I didn't mean to. But I could probably get used to that, and it's not a huge deal. You can always redo or undo, whichever one will fix that, depending on the circumstance. The one thing I have noticed on the pen is that there definitely seems to be a bit of a noticeable delay in pen strokes being registered on the screen, but it doesn't seem like it's that severe. And I only notice it when I'm actually looking for it. I've seen YouTube videos of people measuring that, so I knew it was something that you look for on these pen touchscreens. So I was looking for it, and when I look for it, I can see it. Otherwise, I don't find it a pretty big deal. Like I mentioned, the pens are pretty cheap on Amazon, so I like to keep one just at home and at work, because they do give you a really janky pen storage solution. It's this sleeve that you put over the pen, and then it allows the pen to insert into a USB port. I think it's actually kind of a clever solution, and I don't think it's likely to damage the USB port because the plastic is actually quite soft. So what I think is a lot more likely than it damaging the USB port is it just getting totally ripped out, and your pen just, not being held where you thought it was going to be held. And it's... Sorry about that, I had to cough. So yeah, I think the pen mounting solution is super janky. So I do believe this will work with any Wacom pen. So I recommend just having extra pens around so you don't have to carry your pen with you right on the device. I actually do use the USB mount thing sometimes at work when I'm just taking it from my desk to the break room or something like that. But I don't really use that when I'm seriously moving it. I like to just leave pens where I'm going to need them. So as for using the touchscreen with normal touch, touching with your fingers, it seems pretty accurate so far, which I guess is kind of necessary if it's also going to support pen input. Though really I don't use the touchscreen a whole lot, just touching with my hands, other than, like I said earlier, when I play Civilization, or when I'm switching it to and from tablet mode. So yeah, pretty accurate. The one thing I have noticed that's a little bit annoying about the touchscreen, and this is something that seems to be the case on every Windows 2-in-1 I've used, so maybe some of the really high-end ones take care of this, is that there's no oleophobic coating on the screen. And so those are those oil-resistant coatings that you get on like higher-end smartphones, or it seems like almost all smartphones, even relatively cheap ones, have it. But it's basically that coating that sort of pushes against the oils that are on your finger, and it makes your finger just really glide across the screen super easily. I've noticed on the Yoga 730, and like I said, every Windows 2-in-1 that I've used this way, that it doesn't have that kind of coating. So if it's a pretty humid day, or your hands have been wet recently and they're just kind of soft, you're going to feel your finger like having to really drag across the touchscreen if you're trying to pull something or if you're trying to use a gesture, which can be a little bit annoying. So it'd be nice if they could upgrade these touchscreens moving forward to have that same type of oleophobic coating that you get on like a proper tablet or a smartphone. That would make a huge difference in the touchability of the screen. But like I said, the touch accuracy is great. Haven't had any issues with that. And it's always worked. So that's the other part that's always good. It's consistent and it's accurate. So it'd be nice if it was not quite so sticky, but that's not an issue really specific to this device. That seems to be more of a common issue with 2-in-1s. All right, so one more thing that I want to talk about on the Yoga 730 is the fingerprint reader. So this fingerprint reader looks exactly like the one on my ThinkPad X1 Carbon and on other ThinkPads I've used, or at least the newer ones. I used to have an older one that you had to swipe. So the short story on this fingerprint reader is that it's pretty unreliable. So in the test that I'm showing here, it worked on the first one, then on the second one I had to give it 2 tries. I've oftentimes had to resort to using the pin, which is what Windows does when the fingerprint fails 3 times. I have noticed that pressing down harder with my finger actually seems to make things better. But other than that, I'm guessing that due to how recessed the fingerprint reader is, it just gets like super mucked up. And it seems like any amount of oil or just gunk on there at all is going to affect its ability to read your fingerprint. All in all, the fingerprint reader isn't useless, but compared to something like an iPhone, or even I have a Moto E4, which is, I think I paid $50 for that phone. And that has a much better fingerprint reader than this. So it's kind of shocking to me that the fingerprint readers on these laptops aren't better in 2018. All right, so that is it for my 1 month in review of the Yoga 730 13-inch. All in all, I really love this device. I love the size. I've been dealing with sort of chunkier laptops, at least for my personal laptops before this one, so I've been very pleased. Really, the only major issue I had was that early Wi-Fi issue that I mentioned, and fortunately for me at least, the driver update seemed to have taken care of that. If I notice I'm having more Wi-Fi issues down the road, I'll definitely update this. There's some options. I've seen people actually on the 720 that have replaced the Wi-Fi card in that, which is kind of an interesting idea to me. I did see it when I was replacing the SSID, or not the SSID, the SSD. So that could be an easy option. But really, it's performing great for me right now, and I'm a big fan. Like I mentioned a few points, the RAM's not upgradable. That would be cool if it was, but it's super thin and light, so that's unfortunately just sort of the way things seem to be these days. Yeah, I think that about covers it. All in all, I love it. If you have any questions about the Yoga 730 13-inch, leave a comment below, and I will try to get you an answer. Thanks for watching.